Over to you, Ros.
Hello, so my name's Ros Burnley, and I'm going to talk today about green careers. I'm going to talk about quite a broad range of different careers in by green, we mean the kind of environmental and land-based sector, so outdoor careers. We're not necessarily talking about sort of sometimes when people talk about green careers, they mean environmentally friendly technologies. What we're going to be talking about is careers which are outdoors with things that are green, so plants and the outdoor environment. And my slides are not advancing. What's going on with that? There we go. So just some questions first to think about. Do you like being outside? I love being outside. Being outside is something that makes me feel really happy. So that's one of the reasons that I went into a green career. I really enjoy the natural world. I have done since I was very young. And again, if you've got an enjoyment of the natural world, then there's lots of green careers that might really suit you. But also, there's scope for people who like scientific study. There's lots of scope for people who want to do design and are creative. There's lots of roles that involve teaching and educating people about the outside world in lots of different ways, either teaching professionals or teaching people who are wanting to know more, but they're the general public. We've got someone on the call that's interested in the landscaping industry. Do you like building things? Growing and producing food, growing timber as a crop, and machinery. There's lots of roles that are really sort of involved in machinery. We've got a new person. Hello, Amanda. I'm just going to recap what we've said to everybody else. I think if you want to ask any, are you if you want to ask any questions, please do ask them in the chat. And also, if you want me to focus on anything in particular, then do let me know. So I was just covering what some of the kind of features are of some of the green careers that you might be interested in. So I would just move on to what some of those careers might look like. So sometimes we call it the agriculture and environment sector. Other times you'll hear it called the land-based sector, but you've got agriculture, which I won't be talking about in much detail because it's not really my area. But this is the large-scale production of food. Production horticulture is more intensive production of crops. I will be talking about production horticulture, so that's why it's orange. Arboriculture, which is the care of trees. Forestry, which is management of woodlands and forests, usually for production, but it can be for a range of other purposes as well, which I will talk about. Now, I'm not going to talk about conservation and countryside, but I can talk a bit about it. So if any of you want to know about that, then I can add a bit about that at the end. But those are the industries that look after our wild places, so national parks, nature reserves, that kind of thing. And you get lots of roles in those industries, both looking after our natural environment, but also helping people engage with it. So the kind of ranger roles as well. And then what I'm calling environmental horticulture, but this is quite a big group of industries really that are looking after horticulture in our environment. So they're not using growing things for food, they are looking after the places around us where we have horticultural spaces, so parks, gardens, but also retail parks, anywhere where you'll see green plants that are in a design landscape. So I'm going to kick off with arboriculture, but as I say, put in the chat if you wanted me to talk about countryside or anything like that. So this is the management of individual trees in the landscape. The arboriculture industry, it's helping us create green and healthy cities. So it's really important at the moment with climate change, making our cities more livable. So creating shade, but also trees in cities, they can reduce noise pollution. They can reduce other forms of air pollution. There's loads of reasons why trees are becoming increasingly important in our cities, and the arboricultural industry makes sure that it's the right trees to give the best benefits to make our cities and our urban spaces look good, be nice places to be, but also be as healthy as they can be. So they're looking at tree health, shape, form. They're planting and specifying and designing with trees. So it's not a simple thing to get the right tree in the right place, particularly in difficult urban environments, but it might be in somebody's back garden as well. They're protecting trees. So there's a whole range of laws about what you can and can't do to trees, and they will be enforcing those laws and working within them. Excuse me. They'll be making sure that the trees aren't posing a threat to people and their buildings and to infrastructure. So they're keeping people safe. And they're also preventing damage to buildings and infrastructure and making sure it's managed, if you have trees and buildings that are close to each other. So that is the kind of main activities that you'll find within this industry that's called the arboriculture industry. They also do lots of things like keeping power lines clear, keeping railway lines clear, keeping roads clear so that the trees that are in our environment don't interfere with our utilities. It's an industry that's always looking for more people, which is, a good thing to know about at this, where some industries are not as recruiting as heavily as others. A lot of the land-based industries are still recruiting and do still need people. It's not a huge industry. It's maybe got about 30,000 people working in the arboriculture industry, but it's got a good spread of employment. So it's something that you need in cities. It's not just a rural industry. It is a widespread industry. Where they're looking for people. But to work in arboriculture, if you were coming in at a practical role, so as an arborist, sometimes called a tree surgeon, it's practical tree work. You need a head for heights. I've done a bit of tree climbing in my career, and it's not for everybody. Working in trees, because they will be using machinery like chainsaws and hand saws, and they will be using them from heights in a tree. That might be using a rope and harness, or it might be using what we would call a mute, but you might know as a cherry picker, so a platform that can be elevated. It does involve a lot of the land-based industries at a practical level, involves being able to do physical work outdoor in all weathers. Now, someone like me loved being outside. I'm not practical anymore, but when I was practical, I was a gardener for quite a few years. I loved being outside. I loved seeing the results of the work that I'd done. With the land-based sector, you can see, you work hard for a morning and you can see what you've done because you will have made a difference to whatever it was that you were working on. And it does require skill. All of our practical roles are actually very skilled. They're not often perceived to be skilled, but particularly with arboriculture, it's a good industry to talk about this with, because if you're doing work on a tree, you can make that tree flawed for the rest of its useful life if you do bad tree work on it. So if you put the cuts in bad places, or if you don't understand how the tree works, how it fits together, and you don't work with the tree and its structure, you can actually make it more unstable, not less. So it's very skilled work. And it's great if you've got a love of trees and an interest in understanding trees and how they fit together, how they function. There are consultancy roles, so there's great progression in our industries. Again, often it's the practical roles that people see, but consultants we have a whole sort of sector of consultants that advise on tree care and management. So these people go out and inspect trees, or at a more senior level. So we have senior leaders who will be managing trees over large areas. So they'll have to decide how often those trees are inspected. They'll have to make sure that the works happen so that they keep those trees safe. They keep the people that are working and living around those trees safe, but also that the management of those trees means that they'll have the most useful and the longest life that they can have. So that would be the consultancy. And then in this tree officer role is something that would be within local authorities and tree officers. And again, you get senior tree officers, you get quite junior tree officers, but they are making sure that people don't do things to trees that they shouldn't. They're advising the public on trees. They're making sure that building sites, trees are properly looked after. Consultants do this as well. So on a building site where you've got a large number of houses going up, you might have some trees. So tree officers and consultants will be making sure that the builders know how to look after those trees. They know what to do and what they can't do around those trees to hurt them. But they're also for a tree officer, it's also about enforcing something called tree preservation orders, which is special trees in our environment that have been recognised because they are important in terms of how a place looks and feels, and you can't just chop those trees down or do works on those trees. And a tree officer will make sure that the proper processes are followed to look after trees that are special and make our environment look and feel how it does. So there's some, if you're looking at those pictures and thinking that, what is that? The one on the left, it's a gall on an oak tree, which is where an insect has made the tree make a little house for it. The one on the right, it's a flower on a conifer, and then in the middle, it's somebody doing some tree work from a rope and harness. These are the sorts of things you'll need to know about and be able to do if you want to be a practical tree worker. But there are also quite a lot of roles that don't involve, if you're still interested in trees but don't like the idea of climbing, there are still ground-based roles, and there are these more consultancy roles as well. So there are roles that you can do that keep your feet on the ground. So have we got any questions about arboriculture before I move on to forestry? You're all very quiet. So we have, so I'm going to talk about forestry. So a lot of people don't know the difference between arboriculture and forestry, and why would you? I mean, but in a very simple way, foresters will look at a forest and they will see the whole forest. Sorry.
Sorry, Ross.
Yeah,
can I just ask a quick question? It's Amanda from Pinterest. In terms of agriculture and the skills that people need, do you have like recommended courses that young people might do, and kind of like a pathway career progression that you might be able to?
When you're asking about agriculture, do you mean as in the agricultural industry, so farming?
What you've just been talking about was arboriculture.
Oh, arboriculture. Yes, no, I have, and I will get to them, but I've put them with forestry. There are apprenticeships, there are qualifications, and if you're interested in arboriculture, the first place I would look at, and I've got a link later on, is the Arboriculture Association website, because they list all the qualifications. So there's college-based qualifications you can do. There's an apprenticeship called the Arborist Apprenticeship. We are actually working on 2 more apprenticeships, one for what we're calling an arboriculturalist, which is a kind of a tree officer, first stage consultancy role, and also one for a degree level senior consultancy role. So there's apprenticeships, there's qualifications you can do. Sometimes finding a provider can be a little bit difficult depending on where you are in the country. But the Arboriculture Association website has quite a lot of guidance on where the providers are. And their website is down at the moment, which is really annoying for this presentation. But the Royal Forestry Society, their website also lists courses to help people find courses. And for arboriculture, there are a good spread. You might not find one in your local. Usually you'll find them. There's colleges that we call agricultural colleges, which have lots of land and space and can offer these more practical land qualifications. And there's a good spread of these over the country. They won't all do arboriculture, but you'll find that there should be one in your vicinity. There's more around for arboriculture than there is for forestry. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's fab. Thank you.
No, that's great. So forestry, you're looking at the forest or a woodland rather than looking at a single tree. So if an arboriculturist walked into a forest, they would look at each tree individually. So they might be managing groups of trees, but they will be inspecting each one individually, looking at it for its individual health and what to do to make that healthy. A forester will look at a woodland or a forest, and it will look at the whole thing. So they might spot check some trees, but they will be looking at the health of the forest. They'll be looking at the ecology of the forest. And by ecology, I mean the interactions between the animals and the plants in the forest. They will be also growing those trees for a purpose. So that might be commercial production, but also it might be so that's timber, growing of timber for houses, pallets. Timber is a renewable resource. It locks carbon. And if forests are managed properly, and in England we have got, in the UK, we've got standards to make sure that forests are managed so that they are benefiting the environment. So, sometimes people think about chopping down trees in forests as being a really bad thing. And if that is a native ecosystem, it is. But if it's a managed forest, it can be actually a good thing for biodiversity if it's done right, because you end up with trees of different ages. So a forester has to understand about the forest, the water, the interaction between the animals and plants in the forest, how it all fits together. And if they're growing a crop that you're not going to harvest for 30 or 40 years, they've got to have a really long view as well. And they've got to plant the right trees that are going to produce the right crop that's going to have a market and also still be healthy given climate change and all of those things in 30 or 40 years. So it's amazing industry, really. They need to understand the pests and diseases of the trees in the forest. If you've been growing something for 20 years and you get a pest and disease come in and damage that crop, it's a real hit, for the investment. They plan the planting and the care of woodland. So a forest, if you're going to have a timber crop, you won't just leave it. It has to be managed. The trees have to be thin so they're not too close together. They manage the trees so that when they harvest them, they will be nice straight trees that will produce the kind of wood that they're looking for. If you just leave them alone, you won't get that. It's primary production industry. It was a key industry in the first lockdown. I think it is again. I haven't checked, but I'm pretty sure it will be again today, because we need wood products and we need them to keep moving. But also, it's an industry that provides recreation. I don't know if many of you've been out to a forest to do any exercise in lockdown, but foresters are now having to manage and embracing managing these spaces that are productive landscapes that are producing wood, but also, whilst they're growing, these spaces are being used by people for recreation, and it's a place where people go to make themselves feel happy. So all of those things that we talked about with arboriculture, sometimes people will talk about it as forest bathing, but basically there's a lot of evidence now that if you spend time in green spaces, but particularly in forests, you feel better. And at the moment we all need a bit of that, don't we? But it's also a place where you can get exercise, people get fitter if they've got access to woodlands, and forestry is embracing all of those things, as well as being a really important primary production industry. So if you wanted to get started, forest operative, this is practical work in the forest: planting, felling, thinning. Again, skilled physical work in all weathers. Tends to be more rural forestry as an industry, so you probably will be located in rural locations because you don't get many productive I mean, there is forestry in more urban areas, but it tends to be in more rural locations. You need to have an interest in understanding forestry and also machinery. So you might have an image in your head of a forester with a chainsaw, but actually there's an awful lot of very big machines involved. So forest harvesting machines. So if you like big machines and being outdoors, then it's a great industry to have a look at. Lots of technology. So forest supervisors, these manage teams of people and forestry sites. So it's really complicated with a forestry site. You've got really big machines, you've got people, you might have mountain bikers and walkers to deal with, and you've got to keep everybody safe. But you've also got to get the machines into the forest. You've got to get the wood out of the forest. Again, large lorries, heavy machinery. So it's forestry supervisors have got a lot of things that they need to balance to keep everybody safe and to get the product out of the forest and harvest safely. Foresters, now, this is kind of a more senior role. So, they might have a degree, a forester. Sometimes our industries are not seen to have that progression, but there is really good progression in our industries. And they have to design an established forest. So they decide what trees to plant, how many, what mixture of trees. They've got to balance lots of different factors, including, what's this forest for? Is it a forest that's primarily there for recreation, or is it productive too? If it's productive, then what's the markets going to be like? What are the pests and diseases? What's the climate going to be like? When they decide what trees to plant. So, and also they are managing forests. So, I've talked already a bit that you can't just leave a forest. You've got to keep managing the trees to keep them healthy and to make sure that they produce the crop that you want to. So they also will advise and write plans for managing forests to meet the really quite strict requirements that we have nowadays for production of forests in the UK, wood in the UK. So we've got something called the UK Forest Standard, and that makes sure that all sorts of different things, local people, the ecology, wildlife are all taken into account when you're managing and you're designing and establishing a forest. I'm sorry, one of my kids is playing the piano, so if you can hear some background noise, I'm sorry about that. That's homeschooling, home working. So here's some pictures of the sorts of environments you might find yourself in forestry, and the kind of machines that you might are used quite regularly in that industry. So here's some links for you. I don't know if you'll have access to this, but for forestry, there is the Forest Operative Apprenticeship. So in England, we have an apprenticeship. If you need information about the other nations, then it'd probably be easier if you ask me outside of this session. There's some really good websites. So definitely worth having a look at Forestry England careers, the Forestry Careers website. So there's a couple of Forestry Careers websites. The Lantra website, if you want some videos, there's quite a lot of little short clips on both arboriculture and forestry about what it might be like to, what jobs are like in practice in these industries. So we are actually in the process of developing a degree level apprenticeship as well. So there's a Forest Operative Apprenticeship, which is a level 2 and a good starting point, but there is going to be progression on apprenticeships as well in this industry. So is there any other questions on forestry and arboriculture? Brilliant. With forestry, it can be harder to find a training provider, because it is a smaller industry. But there are providers. Herefordshire and Ludlow College do have provision. There are a couple of others, and you'll find the forestry careers, the Royal Forestry Society website usually would list them all. I think they still do, but they're having a bit of trouble with their website. So if you've got any problems, then just if you email them, they'll point you in the right direction. But they do keep up-to-date lists of all of the provision that's available for college-based courses and for apprenticeships in forestry. So environmental horticulture. So this is where I've spent most of my career. This is gardening. But it's not just gardening. Some people are looking after domestic gardens in this industry. Some are looking after public gardens. Some are looking after parks. But also they're keeping our city centres, the green bits in our city centres, the hanging baskets, if you go shopping, you go to a retail park, or if you go to a business park, you'll find that there are plants, trees, shrubs. It is the horticultural industry that will be looking after these spaces. I've already talked a bit about health and well-being and how green environments make us feel and how they make us healthier. Horticulture is enormously important in that, particularly for urban people, because mostly their exposure to nature is going to be in a managed horticultural setting like a park or a public garden. And it is really important for people to have that connection with nature. It makes them feel better, and it is that space that the horticultural industry is providing. But also it's very important with the horticultural industry. It's very important economically. A lot of people, when they are able to travel, visit Britain, and most people, the statistics show that visiting gardens is one of the things that international visitors will do. So it's actually driving parts of the tourism economy, and it's an important industry, and it's a big industry as well. I mean, we're talking something like 300,000 directly employed people. So, this is a big industry. It is recruiting. It needs people. And there's loads of varieties to the kind of jobs you might want to do. So there's a lot of science, and there's jobs in science, but even to be a good gardener, you need a little bit of science. Plant pest and disease. You can be a specialist in plant pest and disease. This is increasingly important as we're getting more problems with pest and disease. You probably heard about some in the news. Gardener, garden supervisor, head gardener, these are all roles. sort of with more traditionally with the larger gardens or domestic gardens or public gardens. Grounds maintenance operative, supervisor or technical manager, these are the kind of job titles you might see in the commercial horticulture sector. So these are the big organisations that are looking after a lot of, you know, like Tesco's car parks, you know, the plants in those sorts of sites. Then landscape construction. I know one of you are interested in landscape construction. These are the people that build our, you know, they build outdoor environments. So they are sometimes working on really big commercial projects in prestige buildings. So we've got the new Network Rail. It's not that new anymore. We've got the new Network Rail building here. It's got a very interesting exterior design, and that is landscape construction. Landscape architects will design those sorts of environments, and landscape construction will build them. But also landscape construction is something that, you know, a lot of people, when they have their private gardens designed and built, it is landscape construction that will do it. So that is does involve planting, but if you specialize in landscape construction, you won't be maintaining plants that much. So if you're really into plants, then you're probably more interested in horticultural maintenance, so the kind of gardening roles. But if you like building things, patios, walls, steps, you know, you can make, you know, there's some amazing things going on in design at the moment. So if you like building things, then you're probably looking for landscape construction, and people do tend to specialize. And I tend to find that some people like doing both, but a lot of people would prefer to either build gardens or were more interested in maintaining them. You've also got the park sector. So they have a wide range of parks, you know, with different titles, but operatives that are doing basically similar things to gardeners, but with different job titles. So the apprenticeship that is, I'll talk about in a minute, but there's a horticulture landscape operative and supervisor. You know, those apprenticeships will fit maintenance roles, and it has a construction route in it too. So it will fit pretty much all of these sectors. Unless you specifically want to go into science, you may want to take a more academic route. But if you want to look after or build landscapes, those apprenticeships are a good start. But also you've got garden designer. I've not got landscape architect on here as well, but garden designers tend to design gardens, whereas a landscape architect would do a larger environment, and you know, might work in local authorities or for landscape architecture firms. It will provide, you know, an example would be if there's a, you know, they will be needed for any new building that has got outdoor space, that's got green and hard elements. But you know, they will also be doing the really kind of high level projects, like you know, there's a new garden being built by the Royal Horticultural Society. You know, there will have been landscape architects involved with that, and garden designers tend to design gardens, but there is a grey area because you know, a garden designer may move on to the larger garden projects as well. So loads of different jobs. So if these sorts of things make you look happy and you like the idea of being outside working in these kind of environments, or working with plants, then this might be the route you want to take. So just check the time. Yeah, we're doing all right. So there's some really good websites. Go Landscape. So if you're interested in landscaping, Go Landscape is the website where I would start. If you're more broadly not sure, Careers in Horticulture is quite good, and Royal Horticultural Society careers as well. It's quite good and broad, and they'll both have some forestry and arboriculture information as well. Grow Careers too. If you're really interested in gardens and maintenance, I would suggest you look at the what we call the heebie-jeebies, but it's the Historic and Botanic Garden Training Programme. It has a really good list of practical training programs. Some of them will be apprenticeships, some of them won't, that are run by gardens. There's a few of them out there. So it's a good place to start. You can do qualifications in horticulture, and they're quite widely available. If you contact your local land-based college, and there are lists of them on the internet, they will likely have some kind of horticultural provision, and there will be a range of courses that you can do. But if you want to do an apprenticeship, and if apprenticeships are always really good because the industry values experience as well as learning, you need both. And so if you do an apprenticeship, you get both at once. So you've got horticulture landscape operative, so that's level 2, that's maintaining and constructing So it's got two routes. You can either specialise in construction or you can specialise in maintenance. And it's a practical role. And then you've got a higher level of technical knowledge, so a bit more knowledge about plants, how they work, how to manage grass, how to manage borders for ornamental, how to manage summer bedding displays. It's a lot of different areas you might need to cover, but also how to deal with people in horticultural sites, how to make sure they have a good experience, how to make sure they can move through those sites safely and knowing where they're going. So that would be in the horticulture supervisor apprenticeship, and there will be a level 5 technical manager apprenticeship that's under development. But just like with our other industries, there's progression. You can work in a practical role, or you can become a manager, or you could end up being a curator of one of the big gardens that collect with plant collections that you might have heard of, like the RHS gardens or Kew. These are really senior roles. So there's there's a very wide range of different roles, and the same goes in the commercial sector and the landscaping sector. There are managers with that more technical knowledge that are then directing the operatives that are undertaking the works on the ground. Production horticulture. I don't know if any of you are. Okay, I've got someone here. Horticulture. You're looking at doing an apprenticeship. I've been very. I've been very involved with the apprenticeships, and they are going really well. And so I hope that you get your. It's a really good place to start, because if you get a college qualification, that is a good place to start. But I would recommend that you do quite a bit of volunteering alongside it, or try and get a job, part time, because it is really, with horticulture, it's a skill. It's not something that you can. The knowledge is incredibly important, but you've got to see how a plant responds to what you do to it, and that takes a bit of time and practice. So getting that practical hands-on experience alongside your learning is definitely a good way to make yourself very employable going forwards. Production horticulture. So this is, people quite often ask me, how does production horticulture differ from agriculture? And I'd always say it's actually it requires a high level of inputs, but the simple thing is, if it's a field crop and you've got to get you off your tractor and do something to it by hand, it's probably a horticultural crop. If you get to stay on your tractor, then it's probably an agricultural crop. So horticultural crops, for example, asparagus, you would be they have to be cut by hand. That takes a lot of time, so it makes it a high input crop, and it's horticultural. But all of our sort of soft fruit and top fruits, they would be considered. So those, the raspberries that you get, the apples, the pears, they are grown by horticulturists in the production horticulture industry. If you go to the garden centre and you buy some trees, some shrubs, some pansies to put in for winter, that will come from the what we would call a hardy nursery stock industry, but as part of the production horticulture industry. If you're buying herbs in the supermarket, live herbs or cut herbs, they will have been grown by horticulturists. So horticulture is providing a significant proportion of our food, and our health, the more healthy foods that we eat as well. And we have I think you'd be surprised at the amount of horticultural production that we do have in the UK. There's a lot of science in horticultural production. If you are producing flowers for a garden centre, you will want your crop to all flower at the same time. So they manipulate those plants to make sure that they are all the same size, and they're all flowering at the same time, so that then the crop can go to the garden centre when they want it. There is a lot of technology involved. So there's an awful lot of mechanisation in the production of plants for different purposes. There are practical roles, there are supervisory roles, and there are also some quite highly scientific roles, advising and managing the management of crops to keep them healthy, keep pest and disease out, but also make sure that they are as efficient as possible and as reliable as possible and as uniform as possible, so that this is a pepper crop that you're looking at that's in England. It's grown down on the south coast. It's a huge glass house that's producing peppers for that you might buy in the supermarket, and they need to be of the right quality, the right size, the right colour, and they need to have the right management, so that not just growing them, but then how they're harvested, how they're transported, how they're stored, to make sure that they've got the shelf life, that when you buy your pepper in the supermarket, that it's something that you would think would being a good quality. So here's some links for production horticulture. Some of these are the more generic websites, but there are also packhouse line leader, crop technician. So if you're growing, you probably want to looking. So if you're growing fruit, if you want to grow fruit, if you want to grow plants for garden centres, if you want to grow, basically you'd probably be looking at crop technician, which is a level 3 apprenticeship. And it covers all of those different kind of crops. And the horticultural advisor is a level 6. It's a degree level apprenticeship, and it's somebody who will be advising on the use of the management of the crops, what chemicals you should be using, so in terms of inputs, fertilizers to feed them, but also how you manage the any pests or diseases, which particularly in greenhouses, that's, they won't just be using chemicals, they'll be using what we would call cultural control, so making the environment in the greenhouse not great for the pest, but also they might be using biological control as well. And it's all very technical to get that right. So biological control is where you might be using other, say you have an insect that's a pest, you might use something that eats it by releasing that out into the greenhouse to keep the population, the numbers of the pests that you don't want down. So it's all, there's lots of aspects to it, and it's all very technical. I've seen there's a question about Go Landscape. That's Barley. The British Association of Landscape Industries is the organisation that runs Go Landscape, which is the website. And if you're interested in landscape construction, that's definitely where I would go. So that is a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some really big areas of employment in the green industries. So I guess now it's whether you've got any questions or if there's anything else you'd like to know. I shall turn my camera on so you can see me.
Thanks, Ros. That's been really, really helpful, and definitely super helpful to me. Definitely learned a lot about all the different roles within different areas. Just in terms of my role and kind of promoting jobs and skills, how, and this might be a big question, but how do we make it attractive, to young people and people exploring it, and the likes of Ben? How do we put this sector, on the map and make it, a choice that people do consider and take it seriously?
I think we need people. I think there's a lot of preconceptions about what it is like to work on the land. You see a lot of images with green wellies, you see a lot of mud, and there is that aspect to it. But I don't think people realise the science, the technology, the career progression, and there are initiatives that won't talk. The industries are working together to try and promote, because we need people. This is the really crazy thing, that the green industries, all of the ones that I work with, and a lot of my work is around making sure there's entry routes, making sure that they're clear, because we need people. And at the moment that is something that makes, and also I think people are becoming more aware of being outside with lockdown, and actually I think a lot of people just don't spend much time outside, so maybe don't realize how rewarding it is to be outside working in the outdoor environment. But there's no quick answer, which is why I really like doing this sort of thing, so I can talk to people who have realized that there are green industries and want to know more. Because I don't think it's easy, is it, sort of that level of promotion. But I'll happily talk to you outside of this conversation about what the Ornamental Horticulture Roundtable Group are doing, which is a industry body that's pulling together lots of trade associations to promote horticulture. Stephen, that I know you've talked to as well, he's involved with that too. But also Forestry have something called the Forestry Skills Forum that I work with. So these industries have recognised they've got a recruitment shortage and are trying to get that message out. But there's so many folk out there, and what we want to do is reach those that like being outside, so that they know, we don't need everybody to want to work outside. It's those that have got an interest in plants, in growing things. I knew I had that interest from really quite young, but you may not realise that it's not just that there's a massive array of careers: scientific, technology, production, environmental. It's just so broad. And I think that's something as well we need to do better, is help people find which bit they want to look at. Because you might say, well, I'll try gardening because that's what I've seen, but actually you might be more interested in another bit of the sector. You might just not know it's there, arboriculture or environmental, sort of working with the conservation industries. There's about 30,000 people working on waterways in the UK to keep them managed and healthy, and I don't think many people know that.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Ros. Just a question from Ben. He said that I went to a community garden called Martineau Gardens in Edgbaston, and they mentioned a field called therapeutic horticulture. Is this becoming a large sector?
It's not a large sector, but it is very significant. And so just for everybody who doesn't know what therapeutic horticulture is, it's using gardening and it's using gardens and gardening to tackle. I've talked about health and well-being and how it makes you feel better, but actually people who've got diagnosed physical and mental health problems, horticulture can be used as almost a medical intervention to make them feel better. So they might be prescribed a course of gardening. And if you're working in the field of therapeutic horticulture, there's also something called care farming, which if you're interested in this, you might want to look at. So that's using, I used to do some work with quite a lot of care farms will have a horticultural element to them. So these are, there's an organisation called Thrive you might want to look at on the horticulture side, but it's using horticulture to treat people's problems as a organised course, and therapeutic. So it might be working with people with disability. It might be working with people who've got brain injury, mental or physical health problems, and it's getting them outside doing stuff that will make them better. And it's a really interesting area. There's not masses of jobs, but there certainly are some, and it's something you might want to start with a bit of volunteering, but you need that horticultural knowledge to work in therapeutic horticulture, but then you need the understanding of and there's different aspects to it, and people tend to specialize. I've worked with projects that have looked at there's lots of different ways that this can help people, different groups of people, so that then you need those extra skills on top around dealing with people. But it's really interesting because a lot of the places doing this will be either open public sites or they'll be productive sites, but they will be working with people to make them better as well. So there's a question about jobs with wildlife. Yeah, the animal care industry, it's a huge. I was the land-based sector. We sometimes get grouped together. So you've got and as far as government's concerned, with the agriculture, environment, and animal care sector. So animal care is a massive sector on its own. It's the animal charities. It's the various aspects of the equine industry. So that's horses. So that's racing. It's I've been on the edge of this at different times in my career, but it's all the different sorts of activities that people do with horses. You've got vet nursing. You've got it's a very big sector, but I think you probably need to get a specialist in to talk about that. But working with wildlife in green spaces, for me, that's more the conservation industry, where you're looking at a space, but you're managing it for the plants and for the animals. And there's apprenticeships to help you get into. So there's a countryside ranger apprenticeship. There's that's I think a step up from A level, so what we would call level 4. And there's also a countryside worker apprenticeship, which is at level 2. I think it might be level 3. It might be level 3. It's 2 or 3. And that's the countryside worker is doing practical work. It's volunteering is a good way to see if this is what you want to do. But a lot of our wild places are actually managed. So you're cutting things back. You might be coppicing for dormice to make better habitats for dormice. You might be clearing rides in woodlands so that you get a better range of different sorts of habitats for butterflies. You might be managing fences. You might be maintaining stiles. So that's the sort of practical work that people would be doing, but that is designed to look after the whole, what I would call a habitat, which is all the plants and the animals that are there together. But there's also something called waterways worker, I think. You'd have to check it. There's an apprenticeship on working with the waterways, which is has quite a lot of kind of management of the environment associated with water, so canals, rivers, lakes, ponds, but also the banks and the animals and plants that live on the banks, and managing them both for people, so that we've got flood management, that kind of thing. Managing our green places can make our if you're managing waterways, you want to prevent flooding, but you also want them to be healthy, natural environments. There's a comment about working on the River Cole after they complete. They're all very closely linked, the land-based industries, but they are these land industries, but they do need different skills. I know that there's someone from the Prince's Trust, isn't there? Because they sometimes have done. There's been really great projects in forestry with the Prince's Trust to get people into forestry. I know in the Hereford area. Yes, I'm always very happy to talk to people.
Yeah. Well, I think. Sorry, carry on, Amanda.
No, that was my comment from the Prince's Trust. So it's the project, whether it's based on the River Cole. There's obviously, the what we're interested in is taking people on a journey from that initial volunteering post, and that's our role in the project. So yeah, and you're right. We've done great work over in Herefordshire. We're trying to expand that across the Prince's Trust at the moment. So, Ross, if I link you up with the PM there, I think we could get something quite interesting together.
But I would say that if you're interested in any of these industries, I would you can either see if you can get some casual work, or if you're in a position, you could try volunteering. And there's lots of volunteering opportunities. I know it's all a bit difficult at the moment, but our industries haven't stopped with lockdown. You can't just leave our green environment, particularly in places where people live, to just go wild, because people will start having road accidents. People will start, so our industries are still working, and there are, volunteering has slowed down. But I would suggest, when you're able to get out and get some experience, and just see if you get that kick from being outside in the fresh air, doing a job where you can see what you've done, and you don't mind having slightly cold feet, or if it's a bit wet sometimes. If you do still like it, but you don't like getting cold and wet, you might want to go into production horticulture and work in protected environments. So there's loads of choice, but I would really recommend that you get out there and start doing some stuff out in the outside, either volunteering or casual work, and just see what works for you. Because I do think that people sometimes go into parts of the land-based sector because they don't know what the breadth is, and it's really good if you can find the bits. People move around quite a bit because people suddenly discover there's this whole section that's they got into gardens because that's what was available locally, but actually what they're really interested in is forests.
Brilliant. I'm just going to jump in there because the recording's going to stop.
Perfect.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Ros. You can tell you're super passionate about the sector, and if anybody has any questions, I will stop recording this now, but we can take this offline. So let me just stop recording so we don't lose it.